Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in December 2024. I'm here with a very good friend, Alan Jenkins, and we're going to geek out on regulatory developments in cybersecurity, and namely the intersection between what the business wants or needs to do and the latest regulation in cybersecurity. And I'm going to also introduce the Gen AI angle for good and for bad. Welcome, Alan.
Good evening, Denis. Good evening, everybody.
So why don't you start with what you were saying about the sort of situation, how you see it at the moment, and the new regulation coming on board and our current landscape in December 2024.
Yeah, there's a part of me that says we don't need any more regulations, and then there's the pragmatist that says yes, we do. We just need the right ones, and I think that's where there's an interesting change coming, certainly here in the UK next year. The Cybersecurity and Resilience Act mooted in the King's Speech, and actually I heard Richard Horne, CEO of NCSC, refer to it at a lecture last night at the Royal Holloway, inaugural one for Fred Piper. So I think that's an interesting one, and clearly we've got effects out of the EU coming from the DORA Act that's now live and driving towards March of 2025. So those are two key ones. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the US after the 20th of January to see where they go. You know, the influence of Elon Musk and
Yeah,
the
that's
return to
right.
the White House. What's that going to mean for big tech? Because I don't think it's going to be the same direction it's been going for the last 4 years.
Yeah. So I understand this thing. I have to share this one, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
the typical thing, right? There are 14 competing standards. Shit, we need a new one that covers every case. Come back a little bit later, there's 15 new standards, right?
Look, there's always an element, and we see it in our multiple talking shops. So it's no surprise that we have multiple regulations as well. But everybody wants to have their opinion, um, and the willingness of people to recognise that there's already a good standard out there. We don't necessarily need another one.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, that doesn't work for people's egos. That seems to be the problem.
Yeah, I think it's more than that. I feel so. First of
I
all,
was being simplistic. You're right. Sorry.
I'm a big fan of regulation, right? Because I think regulation allows this. In fact, cybersecurity, if you think about it, there's a whole element of compliance there, and I think it's about raising the bar, and it's about defining standards of operation. Right? Like if I'm in a building that it only stands up because of regulation, right? So it's like there's a huge amount of industries. I think the problem we always had was we could never make regulations scale. So the
Yep.
tendency is that by the time you get to a new scenario, you go, well, this is not freaking working. Let's do another one, right? And and then you end up with these multiple, you know, scenarios where the problem is we couldn't make it scale, and we never have found a good way to give it context. Like what is irrelevant to me, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess I don't have much sympathy for the regulators, but the pace of innovation in our world is a real challenge for them. The the time it takes for regulation, particularly if it's driven by legislation, as in it's got to be enacted in law, that process is still very 20th century. Whereas in our world, very 20th, 21st century, fail fast, agile development, all of those things
Yeah,
are a challenge in themselves for regulators and legislators. So I think we have to recognize that.
yeah,
But but I don't think we've yet made a good enough effort to establish guardrails. And to call one out in particular, the rise of AI over the last probably couple of years in particular. And forgive me, the IBMer in me is wincing because what do I mean by AI? But yeah, let's call it AI in the loosest, broadest sense. But the EU's AI Safety Act and the AI conference held in the UK last year, I think they are beginning to put pointers in place, but I think they're still playing catch up, and I think they need to get ahead.
yeah. Well, and to be honest, I feel what's interesting about the AI is a technology that actually creates a problem but allows us to solve the problem. And
Yeah,
and and and, and,
absolutely.
And I actually try to make a very big distinction between machine learning and Gen AI, right? Because I
Yeah.
think they're very, very different. Right? And I think, we've done machine learning for a long time. We've had a lot of AI stuff. In fact, there's problems with it, but I think it's a more quantified. What I think Gen AI is interesting is in the ability to understand data, right? And I think the ability to um, process information and create models. Where I think people get it wrong is when they view it as a black box that can make decisions. And I think that always fail. And I think that will continue to fail. What
Yeah, and I'm very wary of allowing an AI to make decisions.
Yeah.
I don't mind an AI giving me
Yeah.
recommendations, but I would like to understand how it got to that
We
recommendation, the
shouldn't.
rationale.
You see, the thing about this, what's interesting is that in the real world, right? Let's say in the real world, right? We've learned that we don't put, let's say, a genius in front of something making decisions that nobody understands, right?
Mhm.
We don't. Like we don't take an
Uh,
AWS expert and say,
we,
you're
we,
gonna
we shouldn't, but I think there are some exceptions.
maybe some exceptions, but it's like a plane, right? We don't put the dude or a lady, right? That knows everything about a plane and he's the only one who can fly it. But he's not able to explain how he does it. He just does it really well. We don't do that, right? Like there's no other part of our industry that we take something like a gigantic black box and we put it in charge. Maybe in
So,
software, maybe in software we do a little bit, but not to this extent. So the idea that you would put a technology that we don't know how it works, that we don't know how it learns, we don't know how it behaves in charge of something, it's crazy.
absolutely. But but we still see people take output from AI knowingly or unknowingly as gospel and parrot it. So I
But
think there's a weakness in our human psychology, and I'm afraid I'm generalizing, but there's a weakness in our makeup
yeah,
that seems to make people more gullible than we would like.
it's the same thing that allows the fake news to propagate. It's the same thing that
Correct.
allows, the people that wanted to fire half the company to outsource everything to another country. Like literally, there's always misalignment of business interests and stuff, and there's always people making decisions that fundamentally are crazy, right? And they shouldn't be making those decisions, but they do make
Yeah.
those decisions, right? In an interesting way, Gen AI is allowing that crowd to make even bigger decisions, right? But I think it's going to blow up because I think what they'll find out is that the reliability and the quality and the resilience of those systems are not very good, right? And and then what
Yeah.
happens when they go wrong, right?
Yeah, and I think we're still dabbling with that, but I mean, I suppose I've only really played with one Gen AI tool, and forgive me, I'm going to name it, but ChatGPT, but particularly Microsoft's Copilot. Um, I've seen that improve significantly in the last year
Oh, it's
in
crazy.
terms of the
It's
results
evolution.
that I'm getting back.
Yeah.
I'm having to fettle an answer back from Copilot a lot less now than I did a year ago.
Yeah, and it will get better. And but look, I'll name the others. Like, so look, my workflows now are ridiculously productive, right? Like the people who say Gen AI
Oh,
is
I'm,
this, that,
I'm, I marvel at what you get out.
I'm like,
Absolutely.
dude. So I use GPT, right? Like ChatGPT. I think Microsoft there's some stuff to it. I like the I like the traditional one, right? ChatGPT. The one I use a lot is Claude from Anthropic, Claude
Yeah.
3.5. And they have a new feature. Well, it's a killer feature, but again, the others will catch up. But they have a feature of projects, and that allows me to upload 10 documents and then just iterate around those projects, and then have
Okay.
this, and that is a killer. Because imagine, like, I can upload standards, I can upload GDPR, I actually upload code and then say, write me code in this style, right? Um, the open source ones are really good now. Like the Llama 3, the one ironically from Meta, right? Who would say? But and there's some really cool providers that do it. But I think the key distinction here, and I feel the OpenAI Act missed a trick by not naming this. I think there's a chasm of difference between somebody using an off-the-shelf model, right,
Hmm.
which is a read-only model, and somebody training a model, right? Like most of the problems that we talk about is happens when you train a model. If you
Yes,
if
and,
you have
and
off,
and yeah,
yeah,
I mean, forgive me. I saw that more years ago than I want to think about now when I was inside IBM. and the recognition, IBM recognized relatively early on, but not immediately, the importance of curating what you put in.
Yeah,
Because if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Yeah, we know that.
yeah.
But in the early days, it was there was a certain sense of needing to feed the beast, and they fed the beast with data, but they
Yeah.
then recognized that they actually needed to put some kind of quality control on the data that they were putting in.
Hmm.
And I think we learned that lesson, but that's very much not out of the box. So I think there are those sort of lessons which are why the tools are better, but they're better without the regulation, and I think that's kind of interesting.
Well, that's
Um,
driven by innovation, right? I think there's a lot of innovation in this space, right? And to be honest, I think OpenAI did a great service to the world by just launching it and starting the whole thing, right? Because,
yes,
you know, now, we in that world, but the if you think about the complexities of a model that you train, where we don't still know how he learns, right? So think about what
yeah,
that means,
I do find that a little odd that
right?
we don't.
We don't, right? And the reason we don't is because he learns by connections, right? And
Yeah,
so the best explanation I've heard about how ChatGPT works or the LLMs work is they create a word model. It's almost a graph. They create a gigantic graph, right? The difference is that we think of relationship graphs in 2 or 3 dimensions. Imagine 50 dimensions. Imagine 1,000 dimensions. Imagine
yeah,
that,
I can't.
you know,
My head starts to burst at 6.
yeah, but imagine like the richness of the connections, right?
Mhm.
And that's why, for me, the moment that we realize it, the reason it translates very well is because it has that rich relationship. So when you say X in one language, it's not translating literally; it's translating the meaning of X into another
Yes,
into another
yeah,
language. Right?
it's
And
definitely got better at
yeah,
understanding the context
yeah,
around, hasn't it?
yeah. But the problem is that we still don't know how the connections are made internally, right? And I
Okay.
and I think the problem is that if you're relying on the model to know that, then that's a problem.
Yes, because in a sense, you're expecting a straitjacket when the straitjacket's the one thing we're trying to avoid.
Yep.
But I think somewhere in there, we also need to be mindful of the need for consistency,
Yeah.
such that given the same question, why do
Hmm.
I get different
Yeah.
answers? Now,
So if
I know sometimes that's because the data it's drawing on has changed between the times you've asked the question, but
yep.
I'd like to understand what it was that drove the change. And I guess that some of that comes from asking better questions, asking more specific, less
But
open
until
questions.
you know how the data is stored, you're never going to be able to answer that question. The
Yeah,
best,
and that might well be, you know,
the,
I might be shooting for the unachievable, I
yeah.
guess.
But where it gets interesting is that if you go to ChatGPT today and say, here are the 10 main sections of GDPR, right? And then you ask them, tell me what are the main sections of GDPR. It doesn't
Hmm.
hallucinate, right?
Okay.
So
Yep.
when you give it content, the hallucination levels goes really low. And even more interesting, if you then do the same thing, let's say through 3 different models, and you compare the results, the level of hallucination you get in the end is now minuscule because the probability of the 3 different models having the same blind spot. The key is you give it the data that you process,
Yeah, good call.
right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean by read-only models. If I have a read-only model that has a particular behavior, a particular set of skills, right? I don't want it to have content. I don't want it to know, what GDPR is or what NIST is or whatever versions. I will feed in that in the prompt, in the data that it gets.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
See, because we now have the context window is the size of the prompt. So now we can feed a huge amount of data in there. So I can feed in the standards, or and I can feed in the subset of the standards that I care about.
Yeah, and I guess in a sense there's an opportunity here to reduce our bias that goes with our input, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias. Whenever we're feeding that in, we rarely feed the I hesitate to use the word, but I hesitate, we don't feed pure data. When we talk about data with context, it's that context that can to some extent warp the data. And I guess that's what you're pointing at. If you remove that, then the data that we're using is purer,
Is the data that
is
we fed.
cleaner.
Yes, but also
Yeah.
we can debug it, right? You can look at an output and going, hold on, you missed this. So I can go, where was it? And you go, oh, okay, it was not in my input, right? Or
Okay.
if it was in my input and it's not my output, I can go, okay, that model sucks for this. Let me put another one in, right? Because that one, maybe this one better, right? So, and if you, let's, going back to our regulation world, like what I would like to see is I would like to see the regulator saying, here's my standard, or here's the standard I like. And then we be able to have a conversation to say, right, here's what I'm operating on. Here's what I care about. Here's the version of that standard that applies to me,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So suddenly, instead of having, bazillions of clauses, you have 5, you have 10, you have 30, you have 50, right? But they are all in context to that particular situation,
That makes a lot of sense.
right? So suddenly the regulation scales, right? Suddenly, you have this environment where we can scale the regulations to take into account, right, the reality. So you could say, I have these countermeasures in place, so I'm going to ignore those regulatory requirements.
Okay.
And if we can do that, I think we'll start to scale regulation, and we start to have much better regulation because now there's the interactive process, right, on this.
Yeah, and I guess look, we've got to recognize, I suppose, that the regulations are not operating in a black box themselves, are they? They're
Yeah,
building on each other.
yeah,
We know we've seen the regulations build on each other and draw on each other.
yeah,
We've definitely seen that in the frameworks world
yeah.
they actually directly quote each
Exactly,
other.
because each
And
has a center of gravity, right?
yeah, and to your opening point about whilst we might want one, actually having 15 variations that allows some, I was about to say bespoking, but I think it's more about tailoring to our specific use cases,
Yeah,
whether that's at an industry level with specific regulations, whether it's building regulations or quality regulations
yeah,
or something along those lines, but it's specific to that industry or the nature of that business.
yeah,
That's a good thing, so long as the base regulation makes sense, the base framework,
yeah.
and I'm
But,
not
but,
even
but,
sure
but, but
what that is, but
but
it's an
ex ex
interesting.
to expand on that, because most organizations are not one organization. Most organizations are at least 5, 6, 7 different entities. And I'm not even saying business entities, I'm saying different personas, right? You have one that deals with legacy technology. You have another one that behaves almost like a startup. You have another one that's modernized. You have another one that deals with third-party vendors. Another one that deals with internal systems. Like there's all these micro organizations inside of it. And some have access to all the assets, some have no assets.
Yeah, and
So,
I think it's worth. I take that point. I don't think it's so much about organization. I think it's more around, and to a certain extent, there's a bit of sophistry here, but it's about the lines of business. It's
yeah,
around
yeah,
it's the divisions within a company, if you
correct.
will, that
Yeah,
are the different, forgive me, the different parts of the primary and secondary value chain within a business.
correct.
What part are you playing? Are you in production? Are you in research and development? Are you in
Yeah,
corporate?
yeah.
Those elements are subdivisions of the whole, and when they come together, hopefully the sum of their activities gives you a profitable output.
But the
Yeah, and I've
regulation should
immediately
take
gone, but
should take that into account,
they
right?
absolutely they should. And
Right.
as a forgive me, I'm still reflecting on last night's lecture because I think it was interesting. Without directly quoting him, I guess Chatham House Rule was not in effect, but it was very much a personal rather than an official. But Richard Horne was pointing to a need or a recognition by governments, and he definitely said governments rather than one, um, but a recognition by governments that the laissez-faire approach isn't working, so that they're thinking they're going to have to be more proscriptive, I think, rather than um, uh, broad brush,
Is that on
which I
Gen
think is
AI,
good.
or is that on
I,
technology in general?
I think it's probably the broader issue. If you think about I was just reminding myself, we're supposed to be talking about cybersecurity here, and I definitely go with cyber is not just about the security of
Of
IT.
course not.
And it never should be. But that point about is it about IA, forgive me, information assurance? Is it about AI
Yeah,
or is it about OT or is it about IT? No, take a step back. It's about how we use the technology to create
yeah,
effect.
hmm,
Which is why I like guidelines. We should have guidelines
yeah,
to remind us of the need for secure by design, to then enforce some kind of secure and build, and
yeah,
absolutely to have at the end state of secure in operation is about resilience so that it fails safe. It doesn't just fail.
yeah.
And I think there are definitely some lessons that I don't think as an industry we've taken on board enough for example, out of aviation.
Yeah,
When a fly-by-wire system fails, it doesn't mean your aircraft falls out of the sky. It means it has a degraded performance
yeah,
and it switches you to a backup. But
yeah,
there comes a point where the backup systems fail, but we no longer have the mechanical backups for the fiber optics. That's probably the issue in our aircraft now.
yeah,
But so far, that hasn't been a critical flaw.
yeah.
There were some lessons, but I'm a bit wary to say they directly apply. I think we should take them as influences.
Well, I feel if you look at one of the things we're talking about, which is making sure that everybody's connected and everybody understands, right, what they do. I always find that, especially, and particularly even cybersecurity, right? Like, it was always interesting when you have bigger teams, how to make sure that everybody understands the direction of travel and
Yeah,
everyone understands why they're doing this. Even the development crowds, right, that we interact, the engineers, we develop this. There's a lot of individuals that, because they're so removed from the business directive, that they miss that part. And the thing that I find interesting, and this is one area for me for researching Gen AI, is I think we finally have the ability to translate all this to the individual. So I always love the idea to be able to say, the reason why we ask somebody to do X is because if you don't do X, we're breaking these five regulations at the top. And if we break these five regulations at the top, we're not compliant with this. And if we're not compliant with this, we can't trade.
yeah.
So, so I
Look,
mean, it's like it's one of those where if you can, but some people operate at that level, but they don't have awareness of that, right? Almost like they're dealing with plutonium and they don't have awareness that what you're
yeah. I think,
doing.
forgive me. I think that's the explaining the why behind the rules.
Yeah, yeah,
I've long moved away from thinking if I write a policy statement, people will follow it.
yeah.
The do this, do that approach. No, we've got to do the do this because we've got to talk about the why we do that, but also the benefits from doing it correctly.
But that
Because
has to reach everybody.
we've got to sell it.
Yeah, but that had the problem is that I think we do that reasonably well now in cybersecurity at the exact level and at a certain level, but that has to scale to all levels of the business.
And we've got to take all of them on that journey,
Yeah,
but through a position of understanding, not ignorance,
yeah,
not
yeah,
blind faith
yeah,
either.
yeah. And that
Um,
is compliance, if you think about it, right? The compliance
yes,
fundamentally is a set of rules that you define, a set of standards that you define. And and in a weird way, we haven't even talked about this, but I think it's also important to know when you should not be compliant. I think in security, sometimes, like I remember doing the paradigm shift when I realized that my job as a CISO was for the business to take risks, was to allow the business to take certain risks because
absolutely.
it fits their profile. And I think a lot of times in security, we think it's all about risk reduction. It's not.
Uh,
It's about,
and yeah, like I know this is where you and I agree. Our world of risk management isn't about eliminating risk, it's about taking appropriate risk with appropriate mitigating
yeah,
controls. And the risk appetite element comes into there around that's not my decision. I'm not the risk owner, I'm the advisor.
yeah,
I'm here to give the business options at a price or at a degree of control that they want to affect, but it's for them to determine the direction of the business, not me. I'm there to enable where they go, not tell them where they go.
yeah. But I think compliance should play a part of it. And again, if you go back to our regulatory,
Compliance should definitely protect them from making an illegal or an immoral decision.
yeah,
But even then, I've got to be really careful here. But um, Machiavelli's The Prince and the end justifies the means.
No, but
somewhere
yeah,
in there, the benefit for the many that may indeed have some ill effects for a few, that's the reality. But that is where ethics have to come into play. And I think that's particularly important for the AI space
yeah,
because
but that happens today, right? I think what
it
happens is,
should do. But I worry about worry. Is that the, let's go with that. I worry about the sort of the guidance that we put out there will be followed by those who are morally motivated to follow it. Well, what about those who are not? Because they exist. And I think
yeah,
we have to recognize that, sometimes we have to protect people from themselves,
oh, absolutely.
but we've also got to put those effective controls in place to produce to prevent or at least inhibit abuse of the tech that we develop.
I agree.
And I think that's a particularly interesting angle because I hate as I've been a defender pretty much all of my adult life, and in fact, if I reflect on my childhood, I was a defender in childhood as well. But I don't do that out of ignorance as to what the attackers could
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
And getting into their mindset's still an important part of my thinking, even though I'm trying to influence business rather than disrupt the attackers these days. But I do still dislike improvement or defenses after the fact. That still doesn't feel right to me. I want to do more about prevention, but I don't just mean prevention around more controls. I mean prevention to stop the what are we supposed to call them these days? The threat actors from doing their stuff. I
yeah.
don't think we disrupt and prevent enough of what they do and how they
Um,
do it.
that I agree. But going to your point of dealing with that after the fact, right? Isn't that the feedback loop that we do in our DevOps, in our development environment, where
It
we
should be.
we react? The key, what we have done in development successfully, when you've done development, is you can iterate very fast, right? So I actually like this idea that we evolve our regulatory compliance frameworks and what we use based A on reality and B on what's working and what's not working. And then sometimes, yes, we need to be a bit more proactive, especially when we need to nudge or
Yeah.
change behavior. Other times we
Yes.
just need to react to what happens, right? But I remember changing policies because I said, doesn't matter what's on our policy, everybody's not doing it. So look, that's the real policy.
No, no,
Is the
I
fact
agree,
that
and
we might as well have a
I
policy. Sorry,
no,
okay.
sorry, I didn't
I
mean to
was going
talk
to say,
over you.
we might as well have a policy that says you can do it because everybody's doing it anyway. So you're not going to make the whole company
Yeah,
break a policy.
and then I mean that's interesting. You're using ChatGPT because you have the advantage at the moment of being outside of a corporate environment, or
Yeah,
rather, you're inside your own.
yeah,
Whereas I'm operating within a corporate environment and I'm working with clients who are very corporate.
yeah.
So I can't really use ChatGPT because my even my any attempt at obfuscation of who or what I'm talking about is just that. It's obscurity. It's not really confidentiality. So that's why I tend to lean into Copilot so that
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
in my
Copilot is,
domain
is cool at that level. Yeah, yeah.
or in the client's domain. But sorry, where I was going to go with my thought, forgive me, don't let me. I'm quite excited about our improvements at modeling and simulation
Yeah,
so that we can model, we can to some extent predict the effects of changes, whether it's changes within our infrastructure or in our application space, or even changes in our coding within that space,
yeah.
to see which change has what effect and which is the better effect that we want to see. With improvements in computational speed, with improvements in modeling, we're at the point now where we can do that much quicker and much more cheaply, I think, than we've ever been able to do before.
Yeah.
And you can see that to some extent in the breach attack simulation space in terms of what they're doing. But I'm not yet seeing the defenders doing that on their own environments enough to
Well,
see what changes could be to
we
do
need,
that modeling.
so here's the thing, right? We need to understand the system. But actually, I think you're touching on something which is really interesting, which is imagine we being able to measure the cost of compliance, the cost of every single line item in that compliance document, right?
The,
Because there is
the
a cost.
finance folks would have
Well,
apoplexy if they realized how much compliance costs.
well, look, even from them, by the way, they also are a problem.
Oh no, no, look, yeah. So forgive me. My other half is upstairs doing her internal control. She's branched out of finance and into ESG. But yeah,
Yeah,
that whole control of activity to reduce costs or to make sure that the costs are appropriate for the business. Absolutely. Yeah, that's why between I think it's between finance and medicine as to who's actually been doing this professionally for longer.
yeah.
Yeah, and we're still what they're at some 300 odd years and we're at 30.
But
Yeah,
but
we've got a lot of catching up.
but go back to the point I think you made, which I think is really cool, which is being able to model reality.
Yeah.
So I think that the next generation of infrastructure and DevOps and technology is when, the S bombs are just a warm up, right? Is when you start to have these really good models that are reality, right? And then we use that for threat
Yes.
models, but they represent reality. They represent what we see from our data, from our logs, from our attacks, etc. And I think it's going to be really cool to then apply compliance on top of it. Not only you can extract the current compliance level that you already are, but you can start to see where your compliance checkbox or your compliance behavior will impact, or your compliance requirements will impact reality. Because sometimes we push a compliance that is supposed to have an effect, but it has zero effect, or if anything, makes things worse.
I've seen that all too often.
You know,
Yes.
like, because sometimes we don't view things in the big scheme of things, right? You're going, right, you want to protect that. Maybe, yes, you protected maybe passwords in that, but you expose passwords over here. So actually, in the big scheme of things, you're less secure.
Oh, look, there's a, I think there's an imminent opportunity for us to be a lot better about which of our multiple controls that we deploy has the most effect, that has the
Yeah.
best effect at the
Hmm.
cheapest price.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we might even get to the point where we get to an objective answer to the question, should I still have antivirus or can I rely on MDR?
Correct.
Because
But
I'd say objectively the jury is out on that answer. For an outfit that's got AV and then deploys MDR, do they then strip out the AV after the MDR's gone in?
yeah,
That's a brave decision. Um,
but you should
but
have data
some
to
people are doing it.
yeah, but look, you should have data is very, in a way, think about it. If we have good data to process that, even that question is very simple. Do you have any case that you got hit where you had both in place and the AV saved the day? Or the other way around, right? Do you have any places where, the AV, like the MDR saved the day and the AV didn't, right? So,
Yeah, I'm not sure my data set is big enough, but certainly I've seen MDR catch when AV is missed. I haven't seen it the way round, but
yeah,
that's not to say that that's
but
fact.
but that's the hard data, right? If you think about it. And
It
then
is, but
and
it's a small set. That's, sorry,
yeah,
I subscribe to the stats and damn lies, but I do recognize from my old stats, you've got to have a sample that's
oh
a
yeah, of course,
reasonable
that is
size
reasonable
before you
cover.
can
Yeah,
extrapolate conclusions.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but sorry, but I think the point is valid though. Our modeling capabilities are getting to the point where we can see the effect of a change throughout the system, not just
hmm,
in the particular point that we apply it. And then we'll be able to do the cost effectiveness piece that the FDs or
yeah, yeah,
CFOs been looking for a long time.
yeah,
What do I get from my investment?
yeah,
I think we are on the cusp, if what can already now point to, well, this is the effect that that would have were we to deploy into our environment.
yeah,
Because, I can remember I'm going back to my accreditation, to my information assurance days, where we talked about you need to have a representative test environment was the terminology we used in the accreditation piece, as
yeah,
in something that is representative of your business. But it was always simplified. It was never an accurate 100%. It was
yeah,
a simplification.
yeah,
Now I think we're at the point where there shouldn't be anything stopping us actually modeling an exact environment.
Yeah, yeah,
Even to the point that we can put real data into it, not just dummy data, with the right boundary controls to make sure it doesn't slip out. But we should be able to do that, and not at a great deal of cost. I'm not saying we do it every minute of the day, every day of the year, but we should be able to do it often enough to give us hard data rather than
yeah.
educated guesswork.
So let me drop this idea into the mix. I think up until Gen AI, well, that would not possible even today, and well, to a certain degree, because everything was going to be software. Everything will be development. Every system that you want to model require custom code. And that has not scaled. That's why a lot of companies who tried to do that, they failed in the last, or they didn't succeed, right? In the last 10, 15 years. Where Gen AI, I think, allows us to do, not in using Gen AI, it's in the pipeline, but using Gen AI to describe and to understand and to verify how it works. So imagine taking a system design, a Terraform script, a cloud formation, like one of the AWS deployment scripts, and saying, now give me a representation of what is there. And this is where, so I
Mhm.
use sometimes multiple AIs in parallel. Like you know the story of the watches of the divers. There's a really cool story that says when somebody's diving at depth, they don't take one watch,
They
right?
take two.
No, they take three
Okay, didn't know
because
that. I knew you're supposed to take two
yeah,
watches.
but they should take three because if
Is that much like the three computers on the space
correct,
shuttle because you
correct,
take the majority vote? Okay,
exactly. Well, think about it. If you take two, one of them gives you a different reading. Which one comes?
correct. No, no, no. I don't know. I'm thinking about how my
Yeah,
fault. I pressed the
yeah,
wrong button.
yeah.
I was just imagining the scenario of three watches up my forearm. I think I've got enough room on my forearm for
Yeah.
that, but not if I've got a knife strapped on as well.
Yeah, yeah, but think about it. If you have two, all you know is you fucked, right? You don't know
I,
which way, right?
yes.
But that's the same thing. Like if so, I have workflows where I feed the same data to three models, and especially when I want deterministic, and if they don't agree, something is wrong, right? Like I then can do a double check, right? So it's the same kind of thing, right? If you start to ask a model to describe how something is working, or more important, to to verify the behavior or the data, then if you run these multiple models and then do a majority at the end or do a correlation, then you start to get really good assurance. The beauty is that the models are very good at dealing with this level of abstractions. In fact, I would argue that's what the LLMs are good at, right? So that's
Yep.
how I want to use them, because I think that the LLMs will allow us to understand how systems work all the way to the bottom, but keep going up to the business, right? So and I think that, so when you describe this worldview and these models of systems, that's how I'm thinking. But the coolest thing is that this doesn't work if you do it's a one-off exercise. It's like the Golden Gate Bridge, right? By the time you finish, the business has changed. The only thing this will work is if it's all up to date, it's all reflecting
Correct.
the
Yeah.
change of the
Look,
business.
yeah, and that's my point about doing it repeatedly.
Yeah,
In fact, I'm in my day job, I'm busy writing a report at the moment that's nudging a client towards you need to be moving to continuous controls
yeah,
monitoring or assessment, whichever
yeah,
acronym you want to use, rather than doing it once a year or once a quarter.
yeah,
Because it's not the specific results you get that are important. Actually, it's the trend. Which way are you trending?
yeah.
And
But also
I
course
wonder, I
correction, right?
was
Oh, God, sorry.
yeah, sorry. I wonder whether this year, as in 2024, that's drawing to a close, we might look back on and say that's where we reached a tipping point. Yeah, there was I don't know whether you read it. There was an interesting article that I was reminded of, and I've got it on the screen here from World Economic Forum from back in October, around suggesting that 2024 we saw some big changes in cybersecurity rules,
Hmm.
not the least of which was DORA and AI Safety Act coming into play.
Yeah,
Um, and both of those, I think, were an evolution of stuff that already existed.
yeah,
We're about to see NIS 2 come in. Well, not, sorry, I suppose in the UK, we're about to see NIS 2 come in. Europe's had it for a couple of years now. Um, but we're at the point now where it's not version 1, it's version 2 or even version 3, and that evolution of
Yeah,
those
standards, yeah.
directives, they're definitely an improvement on when before,
Mhm.
but they've also broken into new ground in terms of that wasn't covered before because we know more.
Yeah,
And I think that's where I suppose I do have hope. You know, I'm not known for being a particular optimist. I've just been around too long to know that we get it wrong too often. But I am seeing some signs of hope. I do think we've got um, more capability, but more data on which to base our decisions,
yeah.
but good data than we've had previously.
But
And I think
I'm
that's
not,
beginning to be reflected in perceptions. You know,
yeah,
business leaders seem to think we're more on top of it, even though we're still seeing event after event become significant incident that has public visibility, but the world hasn't stopped. You know,
yeah,
we haven't collapsed. We've had options of service. Things have still happened, even when a ransomware has had its effect and people haven't paid the ransom and they tried to recover. Still taken them weeks rather than days, and definitely days rather than hours. But I think there's a broader recognition that the devil is in the detail, and it's not just a security problem now.
yeah,
And I think that collective recognition, I think, is beginning to move the dial, which is why I'm perhaps a little bit more optimistic than I've been in a good while.
yeah. So I'm optimistic too, man. But for me, part of it is because I can now see how we can scale. In the past,
Yeah,
I was having these conversations in my head. It's all graphs, right? You know me, right? It's all graphs
no, absolutely.
and maps, right? And maps. And the problem
Yeah,
I always had was A, how to create them, B, how to maintain them, right? And how to analyze them. Because when we
yeah.
do,
I think your point about maintaining the graph is a good
yeah,
one because
it's absolutely,
when you focus on developing it, you're in
yeah,
it. But there'll be things that change, and you've got to
yeah.
recognize those changes to do the maintain, and that's not easy.
But that's why the good graph is evolved. See, the
Okay.
other thing that I still feel there's a mismatch is that what I've learned was that the way you achieve excellence, the way you achieve a really good product or a really good solution is not to go there, is to iterate until you
Yeah.
get there. So that means you start bad by design, right? But it means in the beginning, it's like they said that graph, like when people say, how do I create the graphs I always do? I say, it doesn't matter where you start, just start and then keep enriching, but put the enrichment of the graph as part of the model.
Mhm.
So any system that gets built has to be self-maintained. And that's why I like the compliance element, because again, we should be having this real-time compliance views where you call like this sort of these uh, continuous assessments, because that actually will allow the business to make good decisions because it gives them good data. It gives them good
Yeah, and
insights of what's
if we
happening.
do that often enough and we analyze the results quick enough, we shouldn't actually go off course very much
Correct.
because we've picked it up early enough that
Yeah,
yeah, we've I don't know, analogy world, we've seen the iceberg far enough out that we can change direction soon enough to make sure that we miss it by enough of a safety margin.
exactly. But you see, okay, here's my other question for you, right? One of the areas I still feel I never did as good a job I should have done is in showing those scenarios, is showing the great value that we in cybersecurity do that most of the business doesn't see, right? And
Okay.
and sometimes even the team members get frustrated because they know they saved in the day, but nobody is aware of it, right? They know that they just moved the ship, right? But and so I feel that we need to be much better at describing the halo and the side effects of our actions, not necessarily when things go wrong, but exactly when things don't go wrong, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah, look, there's often more value out of a near miss than there is about a real incident. You know,
yeah,
if you can recognize why it didn't hit, what it was that you did or didn't
yeah,
do that didn't cause it to happen, that's actually more valuable. But again, that's something I've definitely seen in the aviation and in the health and safety world, that you know, we can absolutely learn from that in terms of what we do. But I think you make a good point there around, you know, security. I'm going to use that in the broad sense. Security are often the unsung heroes because they need to
Yeah,
be successful all the time. Yeah, and actually it's only when we fail that the attention comes our way and it gets uncomfortable.
yeah,
But yeah, we're better, I think, but I think we still have some lessons to learn from how to communicate, how to market what it is we do better. But you know, it's an example. You know, for me, that's one of the reasons why I use the maritime analogy rather than the aviation analogy, which, given my background, you might find a little odd. By the way, for those who don't know me, I'm ex-Air Force rather than ex-Navy. But the maritime environment is an interesting one. You don't go in the maritime world, you don't go from A to B in a straight line.
yeah,
You've got wind, tide, and geography, both above the surface and below the surface, that mean a straight line is probably impossible unless you're not going very far. But you know, if you're going
yeah,
into the deep blue water, you're
yeah,
not going in a straight line.
yeah,
And that analogy to business in terms of business direction of travel isn't a straight line either. But if you look backwards from the conning tower or the bridge at the wake of your ship, you want that to be as straight as possible because that's the efficient route. But
yeah.
being able to predict that such that you curve rather than zigzag, that's where the artistry comes in of navigating.
Hmm.
And I do think increased use of simulation, increased use of modeling is is going to be where my successes as CISO, because forgive me, I'm towards the end of my career now and thinking about becoming a lecturer, having been a practitioner for 35 years. You know, it's time for the next generation, yourself and others, to take advantage of those advances that
Hmm.
that weren't open to me 15 years ago when I was Group CISO.
Yeah. And I really like actually where you were going with the analogies because so imagine this world where, those near misses, we can model them too, right?
Yeah,
We can
absolutely.
model the near misses. And that's where it's interesting. You start to see, look, see, these near misses, that didn't go that way because we did this practice. That didn't go that way because we did that practice, right?
Yeah.
And I find that it's an interesting psychological thing because I always have challenges getting my team to describe that stuff because I think they always want to do things and they feel like that's done, so they don't almost see value in it. They go, oh, it's working now, right? So I'm moving on to the next challenge.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's our own psychology. We
Yeah,
we know the list of things we've still got to do.
yeah,
We don't often reflect on what we've put onto the achieved done
yeah,
list
yeah.
and celebrate it. I
Yeah.
don't think we don't celebrate our successes enough.
So imagine a world where we can do that. So that's one of the things I'm using the LLMs for. Is I'm using
Okay.
the LLMs to create those narratives. And the LLMs don't get tired, right? They just can, based on the data, they can
Yeah,
provide
yeah,
that.
yeah. They don't have Monday morning blues or Friday
Exactly, right?
afternoon. I'm already in the weekend.
See,
Yeah.
see, that's why I'm optimistic because I think we finally can make the graphs and then the maps scale because we can build them dynamically, but
Hmm.
also we can use them to verify reality. So it's the feedback loop. Right? Is when you look at what happens, go, well, then my model is wrong. Cool, like that changed the model.
Yeah.
Which is why the last thing I want to be doing is having Gen AI models in the mix that are non-deterministic. You know what I
Okay.
mean? I want my Gen AI models in the mix to do what they do really well, which is understand and transform data, not give me analysis that I cannot explain how they were done.
Oh, look, I think we should always keep that in mind. You know, it's not, if you'll pardon the expression, it's not black magic, it is science. But we need to understand that. Yes, we still don't have AI is not a magic wand. AI is a way of doing things quicker, faster, quicker, more consistently. Um, it might make a leap of intuition, but you know that's starting to be true AI, not generative AI, and we're not there yet. At least
But
not that I've seen.
but imagine this from a risk point of view, right? We should be able to say that every time you put one of these non-deterministic Gen AIs in your business, your risk went up dramatically.
Yep. Yeah.
Even
Initially.
because I did this presentation, but I was saying, if you really think about it, we get away a lot with insider threats. Practically, realistically speaking, if you look at the insider thread, we get away with a lot. And a lot is because of HR, a lot of it is because of people, a lot of it is the way some
Mhm.
controls. But if you think about what the insider threat could do and it doesn't do, right? You get away with a lot, right?
Yes.
I think these models and these services, when they get exploited, is going to be a shit show because you now don't have an app that had some functionalities. You have a full-blown AI that somebody can say, now go and attack inside from where you are. Because remember that we're putting these Gen AI black boxes in the middle of our corporations. So imagine if that's your attack.
Oh, look, a living off the land attack that stumbles onto the AI in the center of your business, absolutely, is a, game over. If we think losing the primary domain controller is a bad day, losing the AI at the heart of your business,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be that
Is
that
that black box.
that
And
would
then
be
see,
bad.
and that's compliance. See, for me, and that's why I think in it, just to wrap it up, I feel that especially in the Gen AI world and what's coming, we need to start splitting between what are standalone models, even run in isolation, right? It doesn't need to be on the internet, right? Internal, the read-only models and models that learn, which are fundamentally black boxes and magic boxes. Maybe that's what we should call it. It's a magic box. But that
Yeah, but I think
you can
I
regulate that.
mean, we're supposed to be talking about regulations here, but I think there are some guiding principles that we should keep in mind as well. Um, the trust but verify, the
Yeah,
zero trust element of identity
yeah,
needs to be a more important control than I think has ever been the case.
yeah,
Yeah, and I'm saying this knowing that identity is my weakest area of understanding in terms of what we do. I know it's important, but I look to others who are experts in that domain.
yeah,
But yeah, that whole um, abuse of credentials, privileges, particularly by an insider, whether they've been
yeah,
subverted or otherwise, yeah, that is our biggest risk. That doesn't mean I think there are reds under the bed or anything along those lines. Sorry, pardon the expression, but people do go off the rails. People do get pressured from outside,
yeah,
and often, if you can do that to one, you can do it to two, and then our four eyes principle starts to get unwound as well. We should be able to have the rules in place that would detect abnormal activity to
correct.
say this individual, these individuals are acting out of their normal
Yeah,
profile.
correct.
The user behavior monitoring that we've talked about, the yeah, I'm going to stay optimistic. I think we can use those in a way that we've not been able to. We've had the desire to, we've had the aspiration
Yeah,
to, but I think the tech now is there that we can actually realize the ambition that we
yeah.
haven't been able to do before.
And on the optimistic side, the only true advantage we have against the attackers is that we should know what good looks like, and they don't. That is the single unique advantage that we have, where and this is where I always hated that idea when it says we have to get it right 100%. The attacker had to get it right once. It's the other way around. The attacker has to get it right 100%, and that means that he has to behave exactly like an internal user. And by definition, there's a moment where he won't because he's not.
Correct,
So there's
because
a
he's
moment where he has to trigger his attack. He has to do his payload. The more we know about reality, the more we know about a model of the world, like you said, the more you start to see, hold on, right? This is weird. It's
no,
like that.
look, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and forgive me, I'm reminded of Sun Tzu. Everybody remembers, or everybody. I'm generalizing. Most people understand know your enemy.
Yeah, exactly, right?
What they don't recognize is actually Sun Tzu said, know your enemy, but first know yourself.
Yourself, exactly.
And to your point, if you know yourself,
Yes,
detecting abnormal activity should
yeah,
be easier because it should stand out like a sore thumb.
exactly. And the coolest thing of that is every time I've done that, you know who I found was the bigger attacker was business problems and bugs and things that you then go to the business and says, you guys know that this is happening? That doesn't feel right. And they go, oh shit, that's not supposed to be there, right? So I think what's cool about it is that when we go down that route, the value that we add to the business is enormous because
Oh, absolutely.
we're
We
gonna
we
find things that the business itself almost is shooting themselves in the foot, right?
yeah, this is where we can drive far greater efficiencies. And I think
Yeah,
The analogy of cybersecurity is a quality control check on IT done poorly. Yeah, it's very true. We are often because of the lens that we tend to look through in terms of we're expecting things to not be right. We're looking for
yeah,
those things that are not good, whereas the original designers and operators are only thinking about the use cases to what they want to see. So they
yeah,
don't tend to don't tend to look for things that they're not expected
yeah.
by, that's hardly a surprise really.
I know. But that's our
But
mindset, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Which is where we add value, right? I think that bit there. The funniest thing I found when I did my CTO stints was the harder people I had to convince was the other engineers because they were like, "But that's not how this thing's supposed to work." I'm like, "I don't mind, I don't care, it works, right?" This is, it's like somehow they get into these dogmas. The manual says you can't do it. I'm like, it doesn't matter, dude. It works, right? So I think in cybersecurity, we've learned, like you said, to question it. We learn to go deeper. We learn to kind of look at things a little bit more wider than the normal behavior. And then we
Yeah, look,
find solutions for it, right?
my skepticism means that I don't tend to accept at face value what I'm told. I look for supporting evidence or
Exactly.
confirmation.
Yeah.
That's I don't know where that came from, but that's been a nature of mine for some
It's
time.
our whole industry, man. I remember going to DEF CON and Black Hat and seeing our industry just literally taking a company and breaking it all. So look, there you go. Sorry
Oh,
about
oh,
that. So,
um,
so our industry, but then it worked, right? Because things got better, right? Companies realized they couldn't get away with it, right? So in a way, we made the world a safer place, right?
absolutely. Sorry, I'm still pleased at having got to day two of DEF CON 11 before I got outed as a Fed. I got through the first
You
24 hours.
survived. There you go. Cool. All right, man. We're on an hour. Any final comments? I look on the whole regulation thing. I'm optimistic. I think we finally can make regulation scale.
Where do you think? So yeah, I've referenced the EU. Clearly, the UK is doing its traditional bridging role between the US and the EU. But what about elsewhere in the world? I worry that my vision is too myopic. It's not just to English, but my vision is very North Atlantic biased. Yeah,
So without getting too much into the geopolitics, I think Europe has a ridiculous opportunity over the next 4 years.
okay. What
I
about Singapore? I like
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen
yeah,
out of
yeah, yeah.
Singapore.
Oh, I love it. Those are the guys who did that thing where they put everybody to school, right? For
Yes.
AI. Yeah, I think they're doing great. Yes, I agree. I think the world has an opportunity, right? And by the world, I mean non-US has an opportunity in the next 4 years.
The rest of the world.
The rest of the world to, in a way, innovate, right? I think, it's been US driven for better or for worse, right?
Mhm.
And but I do think technology now needs, it's like I was talking to these people. I say, look, in a weird way, in Europe, we do have a culture, right? We do have 500. I'm Portuguese. We have 1,500 years of history, right? There is something there, right, about a bigger view. And like you said, Singapore, some of the other countries, and even some African countries, right? I think there's a huge amount of space for innovation, right? And to really leverage I think the new Gen AI world, not
Okay.
from the black magic, which I think, and not some bits will need to be controlled, like everything, right? Like we do with nuclear weapons and other stuff. But I feel the ability to have reason in our technology is a game changer. And I feel that in the last major technology revolutions, it was US driven. I think we have an opportunity to actually do differently now.
Yeah, and to learn from each other,
Exactly.
the open collaboration that actually I think is one of the strengths of what we do in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
What is it's the breaking of the the breaking of the knowledge brokers such that knowledge is more accessible to more people than ever before,
Correct.
but making sure that it's the right knowledge rather than the
Right.
wrong knowledge.
And it's like,
Define right and wrong, I know, but there's an element. Some of the open moderation that goes into Wikipedia, for example, I think is just brilliant. Would I bet my house on it? Actually, yes, with a bit
it
of
works on scale.
critical thinking.
It works on a lot of scale, right? And again,
Yeah,
the model is there, right? And and I think that's the key, right? I think we have an opportunity now to make. I think we need good regulation. And going back to our thing, I think the problem, I feel a lot of people throw regulation out because they say it's a bad thing. And it's always the same thing. They throw it out until shit hits the fan and then they themselves do more regulation, right? But I think we need to turn the tables around to say, no, no, we need good regulation. And it's the regulation itself that needs to modernize. And that's when we haven't
yes.
done that. And I think now is the opportunity because things are real. We need it, but we need good regulation and we need regulation that scales and is aligned with the principles that we want to do.
Yeah, I think my challenge stroke concern would be I think it still needs to be quicker.
Oh no,
The
completely.
the
It
the, the
won't scale if it's
regulatory
not quicker.
development and into practice needs to be quicker.
It won't scale if it's not quick.
Yeah,
It's that
yeah,
simple.
look, yeah, we're yeah, for example, we're looking at an ISO 27022, yeah, 2022 standard coming in for October this year. If you were on the 2013 standard, you've got to upgrade. But
Yeah.
why the hell was it 9 years between 2013
Yeah.
and 2022?
Well, because we haven't modernized the standard itself.
Hmm.
And I think that's the key. And I think, and that's where I think Gen AI can make a difference.
Yeah,
Not
I,
not
I,
in
I
making a
hope
black
so.
box, but in simplifying it, in making it simple, in breaking the bits of, in creating that custom regulator for one individual, for one company, for one team. We could never do that. I think now we can. That's my
Right. No,
final words.
I'm with you. I was going to say we haven't struggled to fill an hour, which is a little bit
No,
surprising, but perhaps not.
that is brilliant. All right, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for doing this. And I'm going to try to do a lot of some interesting analysis from these texts. So we'll see how it goes, right? To share the knowledge and the ideas
Uh,
that we put here.
no, look, I suspect the truisms and the pithy statements are coming from you rather than me.
No,
I
no, no,
always
no, no.
worry that I'm pointing at the obvious rather than unearthing new gems.
Yeah, you provide the wisdom and the direction.
All right,
Good
look,
stuff.
I can do the vision stuff. I need people to engineer it,
All right.
people like you.
All right, see you.